Just 6 months after Pearl Harbor, the entire Pacific War came down to a tiny, remote island. It was a battle that was really decided in just a handful of minutes. So, we're going to dive into this incredible story of carriers, code breakers, and sheer courage to see how it literally changed the course of history.
And this is what it looked like. This is the USS Yorktown, right in the thick of it. Explosions everywhere. Just try to imagine the chaos on that deck. This wasn't some abstract battle on a map. It was a desperate, brutal fight for survival, and absolutely everything was on the line.
I mean, listen to that quote. The most stunning and decisive blow. That's not hyperbole. So you have to ask, how in the world did a completely outnumbered American fleet manage to pull off a victory this staggering? Well, it all starts with Japan's very, very big plan.
Right, so after just dominating the Pacific for 6 months, Admiral Yamamoto, the guy who planned Pearl Harbor, he came up with a plan he thought would finish the U.S. Navy for good.
Okay, so Yamamoto's plan was ambitious, to say the least. His main goal? Lure the last few American carriers into a trap and just annihilate them. Then he'd take Midway Island itself and basically build a giant shield across the Pacific. See, the Americans had just pulled off the Doolittle raid on Tokyo, which was a huge embarrassment, and Yamamoto was going to make sure nothing like that ever happened again.
And just look at how complicated this whole thing was. He had fleets spread out all over the ocean. He thought it was a brilliant way to hide his real intentions. But here's the thing. That complexity, that little bit of overconfidence, it turned out to be Japan's Achilles heel. By spreading his ships so thin, he left his main carrier force, the tip of the spear, totally isolated. They had no backup if things went wrong.
Now, the entire Japanese plan was built on one thing: surprise. What they had no idea about, though, was that the Americans had a secret weapon. And it wasn't a ship or a plane. It was a bunch of guys in a basement in Hawaii.
You see, U.S. intelligence, led by this absolute genius named Joseph Rochefort, had managed to crack parts of the Japanese naval code JN-25B. So they knew something massive was about to happen. They even knew the target was codenamed AF. The only problem? They didn't know for sure what or where AF was.
So how'd they figure it out? Well, this is where it gets really clever. They had a hunch AF was Midway. So they told the base to send out a fake message, in the clear, saying their water purification system was broken. And what do you know? A few days later, they intercept a Japanese message saying, hey, AF is short on fresh water. Bingo. That's the moment intelligence became the ultimate game changer. It wasn't going to be a surprise attack anymore. It was going to be an ambush. Okay, so knowing the Japanese were coming was huge, but actually stopping them, that was a whole different problem. The U.S. fleet was in rough shape. They were outnumbered, and the clock was ticking. Just look at this contrast. On the left, you've got a Japanese carrier, the Akagi, a total beast, ready to go. And on the right, that's the USS Yorktown, barely making it back to Pearl Harbor. She'd been so badly beaten up in a previous battle that the Japanese were already celebrating her as sunk.
Right, so the experts looked at the Yorktown and said repairs would take months. Admiral Nimitz looked at his watch and basically said, you have 3 days. So for 72 straight hours, 1,400 workers swarmed that ship. They patched her up just enough to get her back in the fight. It was an unbelievable effort, and it meant the U.S. now had 3 carriers against Japan's 4. It wasn't great, but it was a fighting chance.
So all of it, the code breaking, the desperate repairs, the planning, it all comes down to this one single morning. A morning where a few key decisions and a chaotic, violent 6 minutes would decide the fate of the war.
Okay, so the morning of June 4th is just a blur of activity. The Japanese hit Midway Island, but the defenses hold up pretty well. Then, just as the Japanese commander, Nagumo, is getting his planes ready for a second attack, a scout plane spots the American carriers. Suddenly, Nagumo is stuck. What does he do? Attack the island again, or go for the ships?
While he's trying to decide, the first American planes arrive, and it's an absolute slaughter. These are old, slow torpedo bombers flying without any fighter protection. Squadrons like Torpedo 8 just get torn to shreds by Japanese Zeros and anti-aircraft fire. I mean, look at that photo. Their sacrifice was just unbelievable.
But here's the thing. That heroic, doomed charge, it had this crucial, totally unintended effect. To shoot down those low-flying American planes, all the Japanese fighter pilots dove down to sea level. And in doing so, they left the skies high above their own carriers, completely, utterly undefended.
And at that exact moment, appearing out of the clouds like ghosts, the American dive bombers showed up. They were totally unopposed. For the Japanese sailors on the decks below, who were surrounded by bombs and fuel lines, well, as one of them put it, by the time they looked up, it was already too late.
And this was the moment. These SPD Dauntless dive bombers, led by a guy named Wade McCluskey, who, by the way, made a gutsy call to keep searching even when he was about to run out of fuel. They just tipped over and began their dives.
The whole thing was over in 6 minutes. That's it, 6. The American bombs slammed into those flight decks, which were packed with planes, fuel, and weapons. The result was a catastrophe. 3 of Japan's most powerful aircraft carriers, the Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu, were instantly turned into raging infernos. A 4th would be sunk later that day.
When the smoke finally cleared, it was a totally different war. In a single morning, the entire balance of naval power in the Pacific had been turned on its head.
I mean, the numbers are just staggering. Japan lost all 4 carriers they sent into the battle. 4. The United States lost 1, the Yorktown, that same ship they'd worked so hard to repair. She fought like hell to the very end before she finally went down.
But look beyond the ships. The real story is in the people. Japan lost more than 3,000 men. Crucially, that included hundreds of their best, most experienced combat pilots, men who were basically irreplaceable. America could train new pilots. Japan, at that point in the war, really couldn't.
And that was that. After Midway, the unstoppable Japanese war machine that had rolled across the Pacific just stopped. From this day forward, Japan was on the defensive, beginning a long, brittle retreat that would end in their own homeland.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? How the entire course of the Second World War could pivot on a knife's edge, on a cracked code, a desperate 72-hour repair job, and a fateful, chaotic 6 minutes in the middle of the Pacific Ocean.